a dramatic shift is underway in the conflict that has reshaped European security. Ukraine has executed a series of devastating and highly sophisticated strikes against the Russian Black Sea Fleet, targeting its primary operational hub and the surrounding energy infrastructure, while simultaneously launching successful counter-operations on the ground. The scale of the damage suggests a permanent degradation of Russian naval power in the region, and the repercussions are being felt far beyond the military sphere. In a related and equally significant development, widespread internet and communication blackouts have plunged areas of Russia into a state of digital darkness, disrupting daily life, commerce, and public services. As these events unfold, Ukrainian forces are also reporting significant tactical gains, reclaiming territory, and shrinking contested zones along the front line, signaling a potentially pivotal moment in the ongoing war. The focus of this report centers on the early morning hours of March 1st through 2nd, 2026, when Ukrainian defense forces launched their most ambitious and coordinated assault on the Russian Black Sea Fleet to date. The target was not the previously contested port of Sevastopol in occupied Crimea, but rather the primary refuge and current headquarters of the fleet, the port of Novorossiysk, located on Russia's own southern coast. This operation marked a significant escalation, demonstrating Ukraine's growing capacity to strike deep into Russian sovereign territory with a combination of aerial and maritime unmanned systems. According to reports from the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, which later confirmed the strikes, the operation was meticulously planned to cripple both the naval assets and the supporting infrastructure that sustains them. The assault utilized a massive deployment of unmanned systems, with Russian military bloggers and open-source intelligence analysts estimating the involvement of approximately 200 drones. This swarm-like approach was designed to overwhelm the air defense systems protecting the critical port and oil terminal. The target list for this operation was extensive and strategically selected. At the heart of the attack was the Sheskharis oil terminal, a critical node in Russia's energy export network. This facility is vital for the storage and loading of Russian oil, serving as a primary outlet for the country's hydrocarbon exports to global markets. Ukrainian strikes successfully ignited a fire at this strategic complex. The damage extended to the loading equipment, specifically the oil loading headers, or standers, which are essential for transferring oil from storage to tankers. The disruption of operations at this facility has immediate and long-term implications for Russian energy revenues. Simultaneously, the Ukrainian forces targeted the naval assets moored at the base. The Russian Black Sea Fleet had relocated a significant portion of its assets to Novorossiysk after previous Ukrainian attacks made Sevastopol untenable. This base was considered by Moscow to be a safer haven, protected by extensive air defense systems. However, the March 1-2 ND strike proved otherwise. According to the Ukrainian General Staff and corroborated by independent analysis, the strike resulted in confirmed damage to several key vessels. Among the damaged ships was the Project 266M minesweeper Valentin Pikul, which reportedly sustained the most significant structural damage. Two Project 1124M Albatros-class corvettes, the Yeysk and Kasimov, were also hit while moored. Perhaps most significantly, subsequent analysis confirmed damage to two of Russia's most advanced frigates, the Admiral Essen and the Admiral Makarov. These frigates are formidable warships, equipped with the Kalibr cruise missile system, which Russia has repeatedly used to launch attacks against Ukrainian civilian infrastructure from standoff ranges. Damaging or destroying these vessels represents a direct degradation of Russia's ability to project power through long-range precision strikes from the Black Sea. The strikes were not limited to the water and the fuel depots. Ukrainian forces also successfully engaged a ground-based asset of immense strategic value, an S-400 air defense system. A radar station belonging to Russia's premier long-range air defense complex was confirmed as damaged or destroyed during the operation. This is a critical detail. The S-400 system was intended to be the shield that protected Novorossiysk. By suppressing this system, Ukraine not only ensured the success of the current attack, but also potentially opened a window of vulnerability in Russia's southern air defense network for future operations. The Ukrainian Security Service, the SBU, has a history of employing innovative maritime drones, and the strikes on Novorossiysk appear to be the culmination of that development. These unmanned surface vessels, often referred to as sea baby drones, have been modernized and deployed with increasing effectiveness. They are capable of traveling hundreds of kilometers across the Black Sea, evading detection, and delivering a substantial explosive payload directly to their targets. The operation against Novorossiysk demonstrated a high degree of coordination between these naval drones and aerial attack drones, creating a multi-domain engagement that Russian defenses struggled to counter. The decision to strike Novorossiysk is a direct response to Russia's own strategic calculations. Following Ukraine's successful campaign to cripple the Black Sea Fleet's presence in Crimea, which included the sinking of the flagship Moskva and numerous other vessels, Moscow was forced to rebase its remaining naval power to the eastern Black Sea. Novorossiysk became the new primary hub. By striking this port, Ukraine is sending a clear message. There is no safe harbor for the Russian fleet anywhere in the Black Sea. This strategy aims to effectively neutralize the fleet as a combat-capable force, protecting Ukraine's coastline, its cities, and its vital grain export corridor. The consequences of this naval degradation are already being felt across the region. The Black Sea Fleet's primary functions have been curtailed. Its ability to conduct amphibious landings has been rendered virtually impossible. Its capacity to launch Kalibr missile strikes is being systematically dismantled with the destruction of its launch platforms, and critically, its role in enforcing a blockade of Ukrainian ports has been broken. Ukraine has successfully re-established a maritime corridor that allows for the export of grain and other agricultural products, which are vital not only to Ukraine's economy, but to global food security. The strikes on the Sheskharis oil terminal add a new dimension, directly impacting Russia's ability to profit from its energy exports, the primary source of funding for its war machine. As these military operations were unfolding in the south, a different kind of crisis was developing within Russia itself. Starting in early March, residents of Moscow and St. Petersburg began experiencing unprecedented disruptions to their mobile internet services. What began as intermittent outages escalated into a persistent and widespread shutdown, bringing daily life in the Russian capital to a near standstill. This is not simply an inconvenience. It represents a fundamental breakdown in the infrastructure that modern society relies upon. For weeks, Muscovites have found themselves unable to perform the simplest tasks: paying for public transportation, unlocking shared mobility services, or even accessing public toilets, many of which are operated through cashless systems that require a stable internet connection, became nearly impossible. The disruption has had a profound impact on the digital economy. Courier services, food delivery, and ride-hailing applications ceased to function reliably, crippling the gig economy that tens of thousands of Muscovites depend on for their income. The Business Daily Commerçant estimated that less than 1 week's mobile internet shutdown in Moscow may have cost businesses between 3 to 5 billion rubles. The Kremlin has officially stated that these shutdowns are a necessary security measure. Spokesman Dmitry Peskov explained that the restrictions are in place to counter what he described as the increasingly sophisticated methods of Ukrainian drone attacks. The logic, as presented by Russian authorities, is that restricting mobile internet prevents Ukrainian forces from using cellular networks to guide and coordinate drone strikes, a tactic that has been observed throughout the conflict. For months, similar mobile internet service interruptions have been implemented in Russian regions bordering Ukraine, particularly in Belgorod and Kursk, as a defensive measure against cross-border attacks. The human impact of these digital lockdowns is profound. Residents describe a feeling of having the ground pulled out from under their feet. One Muscovite, a mother of an 8-year-old diabetic son, shared her desperation with international media. She relies on a continuous data connection to monitor his blood sugar levels and send him instructions on required insulin dosages via telegram. The shutdown has turned a routine medical management task into a life-threatening challenge. This is just one example of how the restrictions are affecting the most vulnerable. Doctors, emergency services, and the elderly are all facing new obstacles in accessing care and support. The Institute for the Study of War, a US-based think tank, published a report suggesting that the Kremlin may be accelerating its internet censorship campaign now to preempt domestic backlash and insulate the regime ahead of future unpopular decisions. This could include a potential new wave of mobilization, a move that would be deeply unpopular and which the Kremlin would want to prevent from being organized via social media. By creating a system of targeted, recurring disruptions, the Russian government is learning to control its populace in a way that minimizes the risk of coordinated dissent or the formation of independent civil society groups outside its control. While the naval and digital battles have captured global attention, the ground war in Ukraine has also seen significant shifts. The narrative that the front lines are static has been challenged by reports of successful Ukrainian counterattacks. According to military analysts and official statements, Ukrainian forces are executing an active defense strategy, launching counterattacks that are effectively shrinking the contested gray zone along the front in multiple regions. Recent reports indicate that Ukrainian troops have reclaimed approximately 300 square kilometers of territory. These gains are not being made in massive, sweeping offensives, but through a series of deliberate, measured counterattacks. Military expert Ihor Romanenko noted that these operations are designed to improve Ukrainian positions while conserving their own resources, avoiding the heavy losses that can come from frontal assaults. The strategy appears to be one of attrition and gradual consolidation, taking advantage of moments when Russian forces are overextended or their defensive lines are weakened. These counterattacks are occurring in multiple sectors, including the Zaporizhia, Donetsk, and critically, the Dnepropetrovsk regions. In the Kupiansk area, for example, Ukrainian forces identified 3 enemy defensive positions and have successfully neutralized 2 of them. In the Sumy and Kharkiv directions, Ukrainian operations are also taking place. The overarching goal is to seize the initiative and force Russian forces to react to Ukrainian movements, rather than allowing them to dictate the pace and direction of the fighting. This active defense is supported by a key strategic vulnerability within the Russian forces. Military experts and Ukrainian intelligence point to a persistent and worsening problem for Moscow: personnel losses that exceed their ability to replenish their ranks. The trend of Russian personnel depletion, which began in late 2022, has continued, creating a manpower crisis that limits Russia's ability to launch new offensives or hold all the territory they currently occupy. As one expert noted, Russian forces are losing more personnel than they are recruiting, a dynamic that offers Ukraine opportunities to continue its operations as enemy resources dwindle. The military situation on the ground reflects a broader strategic reality. While Russia continues to possess advantages in raw artillery firepower and manpower mobilization potential, it is struggling to translate those advantages into sustained, decisive gains. The months of grinding offensive operations in Donbass, particularly around cities like Bakhmut and Avdiivka, have cost Russia tens of thousands of casualties and vast amounts of equipment for incremental territorial gains. This has left Russian forces stretched thin along a front line stretching for over 1,000 kilometers. Ukrainian strategy, informed by Western military advice, has focused on degrading Russian logistics, command and control, and artillery systems to create the conditions for these localized counterattacks to succeed. The implications of these combined developments, the naval strike on Novorossiysk, the crippling of Russian energy infrastructure, the deep digital blackouts in Russia, and the Ukrainian ground gains are profound and interconnected. They represent a multi-pronged strategy aimed at striking the core pillars of Russia's ability to wage war: its economy, its military projection, its internal stability, and its informational control over its own population. Economically, the strike on the Sheskharis oil terminal in Novorossiysk is a direct blow to Russia's revenue stream. Russia is a petrostate. Its federal budget is overwhelmingly dependent on taxes from oil and gas exports. The Novorossiysk facility is one of the largest and most important export terminals in the country. Any significant disruption to its operations translates directly into lost revenue for the Kremlin at a time when its war expenditures are at an all-time high. This is not merely a tactical military strike. It is a strategic economic intervention designed to starve the war machine of the capital it requires to purchase munitions, pay soldiers, and sustain its industrial base. This economic pressure is amplified by the digital shutdowns. While framed as a security measure, the disruption to mobile internet and digital commerce is taking a toll on the Russian economy from within. The Kremlin's sovereign internet infrastructure is designed to control, but in its activation, it is also revealing a critical vulnerability. An economy that has been heavily digitized, particularly in its major cities, is showing signs of fragility when that digital infrastructure is compromised or deliberately throttled. The loss of productivity, the impact on small businesses, and the logistical chaos caused by the shutdowns all contribute to a growing sense of unease and economic pressure on the Russian populace. Politically, the events of the past 72 hours are creating a volatile mix. The Russian government has built its domestic legitimacy on a narrative of stability, strength, and control. The successful Ukrainian strike on a major Russian port, on Russian sovereign territory, shatters that narrative. It demonstrates to the Russian public that the war, which the Kremlin continues to call a special military operation, is not something happening far away in Ukraine, but has come to their own doorstep. The damage at Novorossiysk is highly visible. The internet shutdowns in Moscow are deeply tangible and disruptive. These are not abstract concepts, but lived experiences for millions of Russians. The combination of economic pressure, digital disruption, and the psychological impact of strikes on Russian soil could begin to erode the tacit support upon which the Kremlin relies. The regime has worked diligently for years to create a system that insulates the population from the realities of the war. The internet shutdowns are the latest manifestation of this insulation, but they are also a double-edged sword. While they prevent the organization of dissent, they also deprive the population of the services they rely on, creating a new form of grievance. The Kremlin is now in a position where the very mechanisms it is using to protect its control are becoming a source of popular frustration. On the international stage, these events are being watched with acute attention. The strikes on Novorossiysk and the energy infrastructure are likely to cause significant ripples in global energy markets. Even a temporary disruption to Russian oil exports from the Black Sea can lead to increased volatility in oil prices, affecting economies worldwide. For European nations, which have already weathered an energy crisis triggered by the war, these developments serve as a stark reminder that the conflict's economic fallout is far from over. The continued targeting of energy infrastructure on both sides underscores that energy remains a central weapon in this war. The response from NATO and Western allies is likely to be one of cautious assessment. While the United States and its partners have consistently supported Ukraine's right to self-defense, including the right to strike legitimate military targets on Russian soil, they have also expressed concerns about escalation. The strike on Novorossiysk, while a military success, pushes the boundaries of what has been publicly discussed. It forces a recalculation in Western capitals about the nature of the support they are providing and the potential red lines in the conflict. There is a growing realization that Ukraine's military strategy now includes a sustained campaign to bring the war to Russia, aiming to erode Moscow's warfighting capacity from its source. From an expert military analysis perspective, the Ukrainian campaign represents a sophisticated evolution in modern warfare. The use of a large-scale, coordinated drone swarm to overwhelm air defenses is a tactic that has been theorized for years, but is now being executed with devastating effect on the battlefield. The integration of maritime drones with aerial drones to create a synchronized attack across different domains is a capability that few nations possess. Ukraine has demonstrated a remarkable ability to innovate, adapt, and deploy new technologies at a pace that has consistently outpaced its larger adversary. This technological edge is crucial for Ukraine's long-term strategy. Facing a foe with a larger population and a massive stockpile of Soviet-era equipment, Ukraine has opted for a strategy of asymmetric warfare. By focusing on high-value, strategic targets like the Black Sea Fleet and energy infrastructure, Ukraine seeks to achieve effects that are disproportionate to the number of systems deployed. The goal is to make the war too costly for Russia to sustain, both economically and politically. The strikes on Novorossiysk are a textbook example of this approach. A relatively small investment in unmanned systems has resulted in the damage of hundreds of millions of dollars in naval assets and the disruption of a critical economic node. Looking ahead, the strategic trajectory of the conflict appears to be entering a new phase. The successful Ukrainian strikes on Novorossiysk may mark the beginning of a more aggressive campaign against targets within Russia. The Ukrainian government has stated unequivocally that its goal is to deprive Russia of the means to wage war. This includes not only the Russian forces on Ukrainian territory but also the industrial and logistical infrastructure that supplies them. The oil terminal at Novorossiysk is a key part of that supply chain. It is plausible that this operation is the first in a series of strikes aimed at disrupting Russian energy exports and military logistics. The situation in the Black Sea is also likely to evolve, with the Russian Black Sea Fleet now having been struck in its primary safe harbor. The Russian command faces a difficult decision. They can attempt to rebuild the defensive umbrella around Novorossiysk, which would require dedicating even more scarce air defense assets to the region. Alternatively, they could attempt to disperse their fleet even further, potentially to ports like Tuapse or even to the Caspian Sea, which would significantly reduce their ability to project power into the Mediterranean or to launch strikes against Ukraine. Neither option is ideal. The permanent degradation of the Black Sea Fleet's combat capability appears to be a strategic reality that Moscow will have to accept. On the ground, the Ukrainian counterattacks are likely to continue as part of an active defense strategy. The goal is not necessarily to launch a single, war-winning offensive, but to continuously create dilemmas for the Russian command. By forcing Russia to shift reserves to plug gaps created by these local counterattacks, Ukraine can disrupt any plans Moscow may have for a renewed offensive of its own. The manpower issues facing the Russian military are a critical vulnerability that Ukraine is exploiting. As long as Russia continues to suffer high casualties that outpace its recruitment, its capacity for sustained offensive action will remain limited. The international community's role in this evolving conflict remains critical. The ability of Ukraine to execute strikes like the one on Novorossiysk is heavily dependent on its domestic production of long-range drones and unmanned surface vessels. While Western nations have been cautious about providing long-range missiles capable of striking deep into Russia, they have provided significant support for Ukraine's domestic drone production programs. This has allowed Ukraine to develop its own indigenous long-range strike capability, a strategic asset that reduces its dependence on potentially restrictive foreign weapons systems. The success of this program is a testament to the adaptability of Ukraine's defense industrial base and the effectiveness of international partnerships in technology sharing and component supply. The broader geopolitical implications extend to the global order. The war in Ukraine has already reshaped European security architecture, reinvigorated NATO, and accelerated the decoupling of the Russian economy from the West. The latest developments suggest that this trend will continue. A Russia that is unable to protect its own critical national infrastructure, its naval bases, its energy terminals, its digital communications, is a Russia that appears increasingly vulnerable. This perception of vulnerability could have cascading effects, potentially influencing the calculations of other actors, from its allies in the global south to other nations along its periphery who may see an opportunity to assert their own sovereignty. For Ukraine, the recent military successes represent a significant morale boost. After months of enduring grinding Russian offensives, the ability to strike back at the heart of Russian power, to reclaim territory, and to disrupt life in Moscow provides a powerful narrative of resilience and capability. It reinforces the message that Ukraine is not merely defending but is actively pursuing victory. This is crucial for maintaining domestic morale, which is essential for sustaining the war effort over the long term. It also strengthens Ukraine's hand in any future diplomatic negotiations, demonstrating to the international community and to Russia that Ukraine possesses the means to inflict significant pain and cannot be forced into a settlement on terms that leave its security interests unaddressed. As these events continue to unfold, the situation remains fluid and volatile. The strikes on Novorossiysk will undoubtedly prompt a Russian response. History has shown that Moscow often retaliates for such strikes with large-scale missile and drone attacks on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, particularly the energy grid, as winter conditions persist. The coming days and weeks will likely see a renewed cycle of escalation, with Russia seeking to restore its deterrence credibility by demonstrating that such strikes come at a cost. Ukraine, for its part, will be preparing to absorb that response while continuing to plan for its own next moves. The convergence of the naval strike, the ground gains, and the digital blackouts paints a picture of a conflict that is no longer confined to the front lines in eastern and southern Ukraine. It is a war that has expanded in scope and intensity, reaching into the strategic depth of the aggressor nation. The successes and setbacks of the coming months will likely determine the long-term trajectory of this conflict. What is clear is that after more than 3 years of war, the ability to innovate, adapt, and strike at the heart of the adversary's power remains the decisive factor. Ukraine has demonstrated that it possesses this ability in spades, and the consequences are now being felt across the region.